William, hopefully your favorite videographer from Two Hats Publishing. I welcome you to another Two Hats special of community events. Let's look in and see what's really happening.
And good afternoon and welcome to Lambda Weekly. I'm Dave Taffet and I'm here in the studio with Lerone Landis and the late Patti Fink. And our guest today is Stephen Kirkland. He is running for Texas Supreme Court. It's the first time an openly gay man has run for a statewide office in Texas. And don't look at me, Patti, like, well, what about Lupe? She's not an openly gay man. She's an openly lesbian woman.
Right. I'm glad you got that distinction.
Yes, I did. Hi, Stephen. Are you there?
I'm here.
Good.
Okay.
Welcome.
Good. Good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, congratulations on getting the Dallas Morning News endorsement.
That was a really nice endorsement. A great write-up.
It really was. I'm not sure what's up with the Dallas Morning News this year. They keep endorsing gay people.
And the Houston Chronicle endorsed Beto O'Rourke.
Did they?
Shocker. That's from that's Sideways Ted's.
Yeah.
You know,
they actually endorsed about quite a handful of Democrats for Congress too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, up here too, and a whole bunch in the legislature. So it's been interesting to see.
Yeah. I also got the Houston Chronicle and San Antonio Express News endorsements. So.
Nice.
Excellent.
Very good.
So we got all three of the big newspapers.
Now, one of the things that the Morning News said was it's important to have more than one voice on the Texas Supreme Court, that everybody right now on the court is a Republican, and it's good to have a variety of voices so that not everybody's echoing each other. Tell us a little bit about that. Why do you think that's true?
Well, the Texas Supreme Court is a deliberative court, which means there's 9 people. They have to talk with each other, try to reach a consensus, or at least a direction. It's not a straight up and down vote. Mm-hmm. So in a way, they're kind of like our jury, which then have to sit down and kind of reach a resolution of the case in front of them. And what I've found with juries is that when you have a diverse group of people listening to the same thing and exploring the same issues, you end up getting a richer, more fully informed, and better decision in the end. Mm-hmm. Juries can sit there and listen to a case over the course of a couple of days, or sometimes a couple of hours, sometimes a couple of weeks. They listen to it, they're experiencing the same time and the same space together, but when they close the door into the deliberation room, they end up realizing that they all had a very different experience. Mm-hmm. So they have to talk with each other and explain to reach a resolution. And what happens is people experience things through the lens of their own life. And so different things have different importance. They hear different things. They hear different nuances and different tones that you have to actually talk about to get there. And when you share those experiences together, you find that, yeah, there's some common elements that we all agree on, but then the values that come into play get more fully vetted, and the decision just becomes richer that way. Mm-hmm. And so what's happened on the Supreme Court is that not only are they all Republicans, they've all been, with the exception of a few of them, were appointed to that position by a governor. And many of them didn't have even a primary challenge, let alone a general election challenge. So they come from a particular side of the Republican Party, which makes it even more problematic to see any kind of diversity there.
What's the term for a Supreme Court judge?
Judge?
No. How long is the term?
Yeah, 6 years.
6 years. Okay, so a number of judges have been elected and then left before the end of the 6 years, and so the governor appoints a replacement, right?
That's the typical pattern, is they get elected and then they'll quit mid-term then the governor gets to appoint. And then they go into the primary with being the incumbent. And Republican primaries don't have a whole lot of challengers, with the exception of the Tea Party has been rampant of late. But most of the Supreme Court judges didn't have a challenge.
And are there term limits on the Supreme Court?
There are not.
Wow.
Stay as long as they can. I think Justice Heck has been on there longer than anybody, and I believe he was appointed back in the 80s. 80s, and that's not right. I mean, he's been there almost 20 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Let's talk about qualifications. We know to be a U.S. Supreme Court justice, you have to have raped somebody, but that's not true in the Texas Supreme Court.
And you have to like beer a lot.
Well, you know, I did like beer a lot, but I quit drinking almost 30 years ago, so it's been a while since I've had any.
Okay, so you're not going to get angry at our question about it and ask us if we drink beer.
No. I did that back 30 years ago.
Okay.
I'm done with denial.
Done with all that. Okay. But tell us your background. What are your qualifications to be a Texas Supreme Court judge?
So I've been a lawyer since 1990. That gives me about 28 years of legal practice. I started at Texaco, managing litigation, in-house corporate, doing environmental litigation. I was liberated back in 98 and went to work for real people. Started doing ship channel industries in Houston for clean air for the East Side community. Had loads of fun.
So as Republicans would say, you hate the energy industry, right? Because that's what they're charging several people with, that the wrong for Texas.
I hate the energy industry. No, I've actually been in the energy industry, and I understand the energy industry. And, energy professionals just want an even playing field so that they want to be able to understand the rules. Of course, they don't like it when the rules change along the way, but they're not bad people. They're not coming at it from that standpoint. It's not a choice of we want to pollute. It's how do we do our business, provide the energy at a cost that people can afford, and if we got to do certain things to make it cleaner, then how do we pay for it? So I've been on the inside of that. So like when I was defending Texaco, most of the time I was writing checks or authorizing checks to be written to pay for cleanup. So it was really more managing the process thing. And the folks that I represented, the business people, were all in tune with that. I'm not against energy. I'm not against the energy business. And I get it. I get it.
Now, you've also been a judge.
I have for 13 years now. I started in the City of Houston Municipal Courts and was elected in 2008 to a civil district court. So
And hearing what kinds of cases?
The civil district court hears mostly cases of people fighting about money, but it's anything ranging from car wrecks, traffic accidents, personal injuries, complex construction disputes, complex financing, contractual disputes, some constitutional issues. As to constitutional rights, we have a fair number of those, particularly in the free speech arena, and property disputes. I think I did a judgment last week of telling folks where the property line was between two parties so that they could, put up a fence and live in peace.
Yeah, hopefully.
So kind of Judge Wapner, but on a grander scale, because you do cases that are obviously not in small claims court.
Kind of, yeah. Judge Wapner was a little more folksy and used more conventional wisdom than I get to use. But one of the beautiful things about law is conventional wisdom actually does get you 95% of the way. So, if it makes sense and feels fair, the law generally is going to back you up.
Now, in Texas, we kind of have two tracks of our judicial system. One is property and civil cases, and the other is criminal. What goes to the Texas Supreme Court?
So we have two courts of last resort, or two Supreme Courts, if you will. One is for criminal matters, which is called the Court of Criminal Appeals. They hear matters arising under the Code of Criminal Procedure. The Texas Supreme Court gets everything else.
So you would, if you were on the Texas Supreme Court, you would not have to decide, stays of execution or anything like that.
No, I would. My colleague, Judge Maria Jackson, who's running for the Court of Criminal Appeals, who also got the Dallas Morning News endorsement, she would be the one handling those. Now, I would get, we do have criminal jurisdiction over juvenile, because that arises under a different code.
Oh, that's interesting.
So I do have that, but I don't believe we execute juveniles in Texas.
Or anywhere in the United States.
Yeah, we execute a lot of folks, but not those yet. So,
but we can always hope.
It depends on the child, I suppose.
I suppose.
Yeah.
Now, Lerone, Lerone,
let me be clear about that. I don't want to execute anybody.
Right. Lerone does. Lerone, you used to work in the Court of Criminal Appeals, was it?
Just the Court of Appeals.
So that was the civil side.
No, civil and criminal.
The Court of Appeals gets everything. Yeah.
Yes. It's right underneath the Supreme Court, which, like he explained, there are two umbrellas, of course, so to speak, of the Supreme Court. But underneath that, there's 12 districts of appeals courts in Texas. I work for one of those.
Okay.
I think we're up to 13 now, but
okay, all right.
Houston gets two districts of its own.
That's right. Houston does have two.
Yeah, we're overlapping, and it's weird and funky, and you're never sure exactly what's going to happen with that. But,
right. And Dallas has one, Fort Worth has one, and of course they cover several counties. But
yeah. Actually, Dallas has got one where I think there's like 10 counties, and you've got some super qualified candidates running for Court of Appeals up there that are just they just blow me away with how smart they are, including Judge Molberg, who started. We actually went to what's called baby judge school together.
We love Ken Molberg.
We do.
Yeah, and then Fort Worth has got Deloney Watson, who just blew me away when I met her a couple of weeks ago. So you've got some really great talent offering themselves up in the Metroplex. So.
Interestingly enough, the Fifth Court of Appeals, which is, again, that's the Dallas and covers about 10 other counties, that entire bench is also all Republican and has been that way for years.
But we have what's called the slate of 8 that are running, including Judge Ken Molberg. And we love me some Molberg. And that's a great slate of very talented people.
How many people sit on that court?
13?
Let's see.
11?
Does it vary per district?
Yeah.
Oh, it does. Okay, so
Yeah.
So.
Some are 3, some are 4, some are 9.
Some are as small as 3.
But we have 8 that are up for election this year.
Right, and that's more than half of them. So I think
it is 13.
Yeah. So that court is probably the largest in terms of number of judges, unless you put the two Houston courts together.
Right.
Now, tomorrow starts early voting. Early voting here. Yeah, early voting here in Dallas. You have to vote within your own county. So you can vote anywhere that there's an early voting location as long as you're voting in your county. So if you live in Arlington, if you live in Fort Worth, you have to vote in Tarrant County. If you live in Plano or if you live in Dallas, north of the Collin County line, you can vote anywhere in Collin County. Just because you live in the city of Dallas doesn't mean you vote in a Dallas County election. You vote based on your county that you live in. Voting starts at...
a really neat resource that's Democratic Party's put together called mytexasvotes.com. You type in your address, and it tells you what's the most convenient place for you to vote. And you can pick a day that you want to vote and remember to vote, and they'll send you a reminder. That's a really cool resource.
Well, we're sending a reminder right now. The reminder is vote tomorrow. You won't forget.
But you know, people when they go to vote, if they don't make a plan, most people don't actually vote, and that's we're the lowest voting state in the country. We're number 50 on turnout, and especially in midterms. So if folks listening today and in the podcast later, if you haven't made a plan, and think about it, like I'm going to go Tuesday at lunch, and I'm going to go to this location. You have to think it through and have a plan, and you'll be more likely to actually cast your vote.
I'm going before work. I'm voting first thing.
Mm-hmm.
When I have to decide who I'm
what time do the polls usually open?
7 a.m.
7 a.m.
It's 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. in Dallas County, except for Sunday. It will be open from 1 to 6.
And early voting goes from October 22nd to
November 1st.
Okay.
Yeah. So the hours of voting differ depending on which county and location. So that's one of the reasons why My Texas Votes is pretty helpful for you on that.
And that's mytexasvotes.com?
Right.
Good. That's a nice, easy one. You don't have to remember DallasCountyVotes.com, Tarrant County. I can't think of their website right now. I had it on the tip of my tongue. Just
DallasCountyVotes.org.
It's DallasCountyVotes.org. See?
There you go.
Yeah, because the old one was the .com. We need to take a break. Stephen, stay with us. We're talking to Stephen Kirkland. He's running for Texas Supreme Court. We'll talk more with him in just a moment. I'm Dave Taffet here in the studio with Lerone Landis and the late Patti Fink, and we'll be back with more Lambda Weekly right after this.
This is Rollins Gelland, and I'm listening to Lambda Weekly on 89.3, and darn glad to be doing it.
And this is Lambda Weekly. I'm Dave Taffet here with Lerone Landis and the late Patti Fink. Our guest is Stephen Kirkland. He's running for Texas Supreme Court. And you don't know Patti, Stephen, but the reason she's the late Patti Fink is she's always late.
She's alive and well.
I'm not dead.
She's not dead. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that.
But I do plan to continue doing this show after I die.
Mm-hmm. But then she'll be the dead
I'll already
Patti
be
Fink.
here. Yeah,
So
that's very
We're
different.
going to it's what we call a ghost whisperer, right?
There we go.
Exactly.
You're campaigning in a statewide campaign in a year where Beto O'Rourke has sucked the air out of every other campaign in a way. How do you do a statewide campaign for Texas Supreme Court? It's not one of those things that people say, oh, I'm going to go see the Supreme Court justice.
You know, I actually make a joke about it. I usually start off by, I've done this long enough to know, to know and get it. It's like there's nothing sexy about voting for judges. There's nothing sexy about picking your judge. And people don't get excited about that. And I get it. So, I approach it with humor and actually try to capitalize on anybody's crowd that's available. So, like, August, I went to Abilene, Texas, which is my hometown. And you would think being a hometown boy running on a statewide race, that'd be a big draw, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's still judging, and so judges aren't sexy enough to do that. But we did have a big rally, and Beto was there, so I got to be a warm-up act for Beto. So you capitalize on his crowd.
Mm-hmm.
And frankly, even if he weren't running and there weren't excitement associated with his race, people still wouldn't be excited about judges.
Right, you're still boring, aren't you?
Right, I get it. I mean, and in fact, if you start seeing judges who aren't boring,
mm-hmm.
you kind of wonder if you really want them to be a judge, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
So, you want your judges to be boring, perhaps self-deprecating and amusing, and I can meet both of those, but
mm-hmm.
not too exciting. So,
You know,
but today you just go out and you talk about things that matter to people, like fairness. I mean, that's something that resonates all across the board, and people respond to that. You talk about, law making sense. You talk about, when I talked about some of the Supreme Court decisions over the last 5 years that didn't make sense, and I laid it out, and people are saying, that doesn't make sense. And, it's like, well, the reason it doesn't make sense is you're right, because they're not following the law, they're not following the Constitution, and they're making political decisions. And you can change that by voting for, someone like me.
What are some of the decisions that didn't make sense?
Well, where to start?
Of course. But it gives us an idea of what the Texas Supreme Court does. It's not something that is in the news much.
Well, here's one that came out of your city and is, germane to all of us, and that is the Houston's law that was overturned, Hero.
Well, and the fight for marriage benefits.
Exactly, the marriage benefits.
We seem to generate a lot of interesting cases out of Houston, I gather. Man, Lawrence versus Texas started in Houston.
Right.
That's right.
That one ultimately ended up right, and I'm grateful for that.
But that ended up right. That ended up right in the U.S. Supreme Court.
It did. And it took a U.S. Supreme Court to get it right. We had a marriage case come out of Houston where the right wing was challenging the offering of health benefits to folks who were married, same-sex couples that were married in other states before Obergefell came down. That case was appealed, went to the Court of Appeals. I forget what they did with it, but it was then appealed to the Texas Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court declined to hear it initially, saying Obergefell's going on, we'll wait for Obergefell to decide this. Obergefell comes down. It comes down in a way that the right wing doesn't like. There's a letter-writing campaign fomented by Lieutenant Governor Abbott, Patrick, and Governor Abbott, and then all the hate mongers to the Supreme Court. The Texas Supreme Court did something that was totally unprecedented, I think. Certainly nothing that I recall ever hearing them do. They took all of the letters, and there were like thousands of them, and said, we're going to accept all of these as what's known as a friend of the court brief, and reconsider our decision and decide to listen to, or have all together this one for argument. So, one, they just trampled all over due process of law to get to a point there to satisfy the lieutenant governor. So that kind of violates a lot of things. Actually violates a lot of things. And then they, of course, had the argument. And the decision came out with the Supreme Court has said, the U.S. Supreme Court has said we have to offer licenses to same-sex couples. But it doesn't answer the question of, do we have to offer health insurance when we, offer the same thing to same-sex couples? So
now, did it matter to the Supreme Court that the first sentence of the Obergefell decision says marriage and all the benefits that go along with it? I'm paraphrasing, but it was in the first sentence. You didn't have to read very far to find it.
No.
They seem to have not read that decision. And more troubling is Arkansas had tried to do the same thing with it was an adoption certificate where they were when the couple adopted, they put both of the spouses on the adoption certificate as parents. But they declined to do it for same-sex couples, saying, well, we have to give them a license, but we don't have to treat them the same. And the U.S. Supreme Court said, no, marriage means marriage. And what we said in Obergefell is if you offer a license, if you offer marriage to one group of people, you got to offer it to same-sex couples under the same terms and conditions as the others. And the very week that Pavon comes out, our court comes out with its stupid decision. So they're just collectively ignoring the U.S. Supreme Court, who's twice said that. And it makes no sense. Unless, of course, you remember that they're all Republicans, and they don't want to challenge in the Republican primary, and everybody in the Republican primary that creates, in the Republican Party that creates problems for their Republican incumbent had asked them to reverse their decision.
It's insane, but it only affects the ability of the case to go forward. It wasn't a final ruling.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong. It was appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court, and they sent it back down.
Now, the petition was requested to the court, and the court declined it because it wasn't a final decision. Because the Supreme Court had deliberately avoided a final decision to send it back down to the Court of Appeals so it could percolate back up as a second marriage case when and if the U.S. Supreme Court's makeup changed, which has now happened.
Mm-hmm.
So it was deliberately, strategically planned to be a second bite at the apple on gay marriage equality before the U.S. Supreme Court.
Mm-hmm.
So not only did it not make sense, it was devious and it was evil.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Something, a more recent decision that I can't explain under any circumstances is a sexual harassment case out of San Antonio. Woman had to endure constant commentary about the size of her breast. Her colleague grabbed her butt, said, "I'm going to think about you next time I have sex with my husband." And our Supreme Court said on this record, we see no evidence of sexual harassment.
Wow.
That's insane.
Mm-hmm.
It is insane, and which means there is no sexual harassment suits. I don't see how on that law you can have any sexual harassment suits in Texas.
Did they explain why?
The explanation gets into and Justice Guzman wrote this, which is very strange to me, because she should know better. There was no evidence in the record that the woman who was harassing her colleague, also a woman, was a lesbian. So because of that, there was no evidence of sexual desire, so there could be no sexual harassment.
Oh, stop.
Wow.
No.
That is horrible. Anybody,
It is horrible.
Everybody knows sexual harassment has nothing to do with sexual orientation. Or
sex at all, right?
Well, but they're going by the idea that it's only sexual harassment if the possibility of actual sexual intercourse is going to take place or is intended by the perpetrator.
I think it actually went so far as to say you got to have sexual desire to have sexual harassment, and I don't get it.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. So a straight woman can harass a gay woman, and there's still no sexual harassment?
That's what they decided. That was the decision.
This sounds like that insane case from Iowa where the Iowa Supreme Court made a crazy ruling on this dental assistant. A dental assistant had been working for this dentist for 10 years. She was married. She had kids. She never expressed an interest in this guy, ever. I mean, she'd go to work, come home. The dentist's wife was upset because this dental assistant was apparently fairly attractive, and she assumed that this woman was going to hit on her husband, and she insisted that her husband fire her so that her husband would not have an affair with her. And the Supreme Court, and so he fired her, and she sued because she had done nothing wrong. Mm-hmm. And the court agreed with him that she's a danger just by existing.
Oh, wow.
And the implication in the ruling was that, of course, she would have an affair with him if he were interested.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
It's insane.
It's insane, and it doesn't make sense. And it's just, I love that you all jump to it so quickly, because if non-lawyers can say no to that, I don't know why judges can't figure it out. But essentially, gay men have free reign now to go out and play with women's boobs.
And that's something that I'm glad the court wrote about and has put into Texas law. There was an insane Supreme Court non-decision, 8 years ago or something. We had a divorce case here. This is long before Obergefell. And it was two guys who had gotten married in Massachusetts at the time where that was the only place you could get married. They didn't just get married in Massachusetts, they were from Massachusetts and happened to move to Dallas. They filed for divorce. You have to file for divorce where you live. You can't just pick a place. And so they filed here. Lerone, you would know the details. Was it granted here locally on the...
It was granted here, I think, on the.
That was Tina Callahan, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was Tina Callahan.
But she granted the divorce. It was appealed to my court at the time, which was the Court of Appeals, and they overturned it. They overturned the divorce ruling.
But then it went to the Supreme Court, which was kind of interesting. They heard the case, and they let it sit for years.
Yes.
So these two guys who just wanted a simple divorce that you would think anybody's entitled to, because it's what people do and other people are entitled to them. So you would think, and they were technically married for years until the Supreme Court came out with a decision. And what was their decision?
They said they could not recognize divorce because that would require that they would recognize the marriage, the underlying marriage. And that Texas, of course, did not do that.
And at the time, it was before Obergefell.
It was.
It was insane.
Yeah,
it was insane.
What their attorney was arguing was, all we're asking is for you to look at this as a contract and for the state of Texas to nullify the contract, which is what both of them want. They're not disputing any details. Would that have been a good legal way to do it in Texas at the time?
At the time, actually, nullifying the contract was possible, and I think that's what the AG ultimately decided was the way to provide a relief without recognizing the marriage, which is to say annul the marriage, is essentially that. They were trying to figure out how to actually find a result there until they just gave up and didn't care anymore, which happened. It's like you got married, you were foolish enough to do that, then live with your consequences. And it's sad that they were so intent on not recognizing a marriage that they would leave people without a resolution of a dispute, which I think actually violated the Texas Constitution, which says you have an injury, you have a right to redress in the court. The court shall find you a resolution. So.
But isn't there another loophole that doesn't specify how quickly the court has to rule on anything? The U.S. Supreme Court generally rules by the end of the session. Sometimes there's something that they leave until October to decide, but generally they wrap everything up.
Or they don't take the case.
Or they don't take, they take cases based on we're going to finish these by the end of June. And in some cases, we might have to write that over the summer and we'll release that in October. But the Texas Supreme Court doesn't work on that kind of timetable, does it?
It's just its own rules. Which means it can ignore its own rules. It gets to decide what cases it will take and what case, and decide not to take cases as well. So it has a similar sort of freedom in that regard. They don't typically, at least for the last couple of years, they've not carried cases from one term to the next. That was an unusual situation for them, and it was a political decision not to play with it. So, I mean, because they didn't have their own rules, didn't have rules requiring them to do things a certain way. They didn't have. They had the ability to ignore it, so that they didn't have to politically deal with it.
We're talking to Stephen Kirkland. He's running for Texas Supreme Court. It's a statewide position. First time an openly gay man has run for statewide office. And you have some cover there since Lupe is running.
We were actually together yesterday, and we've been together on stage and on the stump more than once throughout the campaign.
Sure.
Fun to campaign with.
Oh, we love Lupe. She's been on our show, and she can be a character. We need to take a break. Before we do, I do want to remind people, go to mytexasvotes.com if you're looking for where your polling place is or where the early voting polling places are. You have to vote in your own county. Early voting starts tomorrow.
It runs through November 2nd. I was from Friday, November 2nd.
Okay, and it's 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. except on Sunday?
Except on that Sunday in between, when it'll be open from 1 to 6.
And Saturday is full, 7 to 7, and that's Dallas County times only. So go to mytexasvotes.com. It'll give you where you can vote, when to vote. I find early voting is so easy. I don't even know where my actual polling place is because I always early vote.
Same position, David. I don't know because I always early vote.
And Patti runs a precinct.
I'm an election judge, so I know where my polling location is.
Right, and you vote day of.
I vote day of because
if
I'm
the
there.
late Patti Fink becomes the dead Patti Fink and it's before the election, we're going to blame her for any losses.
Yeah.
I've had people.
It's all her fault.
Mm-hmm.
I've had people say, "Oh, aren't you going to early vote? What if you die?"
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, thanks for the ringing endorsement that I'll make it through election
We
day.
have no faith that you're going to do that, Patti. This is Lambda Weekly. Stephen, stick with us for just a second. We need to take a break.
Hi, this is Valletta Lil, and I listen to Lambda Weekly. I hope that you will too.
And this is Lambda Weekly. I'm Dave Taffet here in the studio with Lerone Landis and the late Patti Fink, and our guest is Stephen Kirkland. He is running for Texas Supreme Court. I have a case, and in case you're elected, you can't comment on this one, but I did. We talked about it on the air last week, and I didn't know the two appeals court judges, and I found them. The case was a rape. Two women in their apartment. Somebody came in through a window. The window latch didn't work, even though they had contacted their apartment complex to fix it. Texas law says that that a landlord has to provide locks for your doors and windows, and basically this case nullifies that basic landlord rule because the two women got the rapist
locked up.
He's life sentence. And then they sued the apartment complex for not providing the basic security for their complex. They sued. They got a generous jury award because there was not just the emotional damage. There was a lot of physical damage to especially one of the women. And this was mostly to pay medical bills. It went to the Court of Criminal Appeal.
Just the Court of Appeals.
The Court of Appeals. Court of Appeals overturned it. Two of the three judges are up for re-election, and those judges are Molly Francis and Craig Stoddard. And they said that they had to prove that there was security needed. Now, according to their attorney, extra security they would have had to prove, but they weren't suing based on the idea that, well, there should have been a security guard because this is a dangerous neighborhood. All they were suing on was the basic tenant-landlord rule that the landlord is responsible for providing locks for your doors and windows. In the original case, the person who actually fixed the windows testified that he was not given the right materials to fix this window, and the judges who overturned this, just before overturning it, got a donation from the Texas Apartment Association's Political Action Committee. So it's Molly Francis and Craig Stoddard. On Lambda Weekly or on KNON, we can't tell you how to vote. I'm just giving you information. And I know you can't comment on this because they are appealing now to the Texas Supreme Court. But can you talk about the effect of overturning this? It's not a statewide decision, but if something like this happens elsewhere, can't other cases refer to this decision?
In fact, other cases have referred to that decision. I actually have a case pending in my court in Houston now with similar sort of circumstances going on. A woman was raped and killed in an apartment complex. The assailants are in jail. And she is, her family is suing the apartment complex for failing to provide security in a number of different ways, based on a number of different issues. So I saw that decision was cited to me, but because it is in the Fifth Circuit, it is not binding upon me in the 14th or First Court of Appeals district. So Court of Appeals cases are only binding in the district.
In that district.
Right.
So that means anywhere in Dallas, anyway, a landlord can now not provide security, basic security.
They would have an argument on that. You would still have to answer to, the building code officials in the city of Dallas. There are other means of achieving some compliance with that rule, but one of the most effective means of achieving compliance is holding people responsible for failure to comply. And that is a tool that has now been removed from the toolbox for people in Dallas.
Right. Well, if Mary and Tracy are listening, they're heroes of mine for what they've gone through and how brave they've been through this. They worked with the police. They got the guy arrested, and he had raped other women, but it was their testimony. And and when I wrote my original story about them, I said, I can change your name. You're the victim of sexual assault. They said, we didn't do anything wrong. They're just two wonderful women, and I get upset every time I even talk about this case because...
And, we live in a state where women are so not valued by the state. You can tell in our budget. But one glaring thing this last session, we've had State Representative Victoria Niave on this show many times, and one of the things that she got a voice vote in the House, in the Texas House, a voice vote, which isn't heard of these days. And then she took it to the Senate, and in the Senate, it passed everybody except, of course, my state senator, Bob Hall, who's hopefully going to be replaced by Kendall Scudder. But I'm not telling you. I'm just giving you information.
Kendall's a hoot. Have you met him?
Oh, yeah, he's been on the show, too, yeah.
We love Kendall.
But Bob Hall voted against this, and it was to crowdsource 19,000 rape kits that haven't been tested in the state of Texas. And I'll tell you what, if men are being raped to the extent that women are, those kits would be tested immediately in every single case. 19,000 stockpiled that are not paid for to test, and we're going to crowdsource it so that when you go to the DMV, you can pay some to the kitty and, get it paid for. It's insane to me. So it doesn't surprise me when the GOP, in control of anything, dismisses women and their injustice for women. It doesn't surprise me a bit.
Yeah.
No, it's definitely a coordinated program through the entire party structure. It shows up in every branch of government every time they turn around.
So
you are right to point that out.
As Supreme Court Justice, you would treat women like they're what, people?
Well, that's a start.
It's a start. How about equal people?
Oh, those. Okay. We were talking a little bit about Supreme Court decisions that just didn't make sense. Do you have any other examples that you've been talking about while you've been on the campaign trail?
Actually, I do. They tend to be in the environmental sort of arena. There was a case back in 2012 where they essentially found that the action of the Hurricane Ike in that case, that moved the property line, moved the vegetation line. Well, let me back up here. on the beachfront, if you have beachfront property, your property ends at the vegetation line, and the beach side of the vegetation line is public property, and behind the beach side, behind the vegetation line, is your property. And so if you buy that property, you've got a property line that's not forever fixed because it's going to move with the vegetation. Hurricane Ike came through and tore down a number of houses on the beachfront. A woman who had an investment house on the beach tried to rebuild her house, but the vegetation line had moved so that her house, the footprint of her house, would have been over the vegetation line. She was denied a building permit for that because the vegetation line moved. The property line wasn't there. And she sued, claiming that that was a governmental taking and that she should be able to rebuild her house. Our court decided that she should, and they did it using precedent from river situations, where when a river moves, property lines also sometimes move. And if it's done slowly, then the court there was an established precedent that if it's moving slowly, then the property line moves. If it moves quickly, then the property line doesn't move. So that, if the river suddenly reroutes and you have an island, you can have both sides of the river in that instance. But if it's just slowly moving, which it typically does, then your property line just kind of moves along.
You know what I would have done before I sued or called anybody? I would have planted some new vegetation out on the other side of my house.
Well, you don't have to do that now because, the Supreme Court said, yes, that was a governmental taking.
In that case, I can see the person lost property that they had rightfully purchased, and I could see some compensation for the property. You don't want property built beyond the vegetation line.
Well, no, what you're missing there, though, is that if you buy on the beachfront, you buy knowing that property line is going to move.
Okay.
And your price should have had the risk built into it.
Okay.
So, in fact, what they did is they made the rest of us the insurer of their bad decision to purchase investment property that might disappear. And that's part of the risk.
Okay.
The riverfront thing, it makes sense because, you have two property owners there that you're balancing the rights between the two property owners. On the beach, it doesn't make sense because there is no other side. So I just, and what really aggravated me about that one is not I love beaches and I love open beaches, and so that, messed up the Open Beaches Act. In fact, it gutted it in a big way. But they did it so they wouldn't be challenged in the Republican primary as being soft on property rights. It just exasperates me.
That's amazing.
Laredo, plastic bag ban. They did a similar sort of thing. They ignored the language in the statute that they were applying. It said you could have more than one reason, but that only if you had a sole purpose to regulate trash does the state law prohibit bag ban. City of Laredo had said, we're doing this to keep it out of our storm sewers because it's causing flooding. So they ignored the City of Laredo's stated reasons, and they ignored a word in the statute so that they could impose impose preemption on a bag ban and render local control of the environmental issues a nullity.
That's
and
insane.
they did it in the City of Houston on another case. So
here's another example that does have precedent. What if she had built a seawall right in the middle of the beach?
she couldn't do it. Corps of Engineers would have prevented that.
Well, if she did it without their knowing. And she just came back and said, no, I have a seawall.
Then they would have made her take it
Just
take
protecting
it down.
my property, but...
she should have talked to you before she sued.
I know. I can get very creative.
You know, a friend of mine who's a lawyer said that was in a conversation and with a group saying that he shared custody of his dog with his mom. And another lawyer sitting there said, "You need a better lawyer." And you could be it, David.
I think I could do that. I could do that. We're talking to Stephen Kirkland. He's running for Texas Supreme Court. Voting starts tomorrow. If you don't know where to vote early, go to mytexasvotes.com. If you need to find out where you vote on Election Day, that same website will help you. And that's anywhere in the state. In Dallas County, voting is from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., except on Sunday, where it's only 1 to 5.
1 to 6.
1 to 6.
And that's October 22nd through November 2nd.
November 2nd, right. How are things looking? You're the one who's out there talking to people, not just, we're in this little blue bubble here in Dallas. The most Republican districts and precincts are covered with Betos signs. So we don't really get a good, accurate idea of how things are going statewide.
So there are Betos signs all over the state. I was in Kerrville last night. I'm on my way to San Marcos today. I stopped here in Comfort to have lunch and to visit with you all. And there are Betos signs here in Comfort.
Awesome.
So, yeah.
I've been to Comfort. I've been to Kerrville. It's pretty red.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I also saw them up in Burleson County, which is Caldwell. And I see them in Washington County. I see them in Montgomery County. I was in Woodville last week, and they were there. So, I mean, I'm optimistic.
It's a competitive race still.
Yeah. It's a competitive race. There's a lot of excitement, a lot of people engaged. I mean, it's still Texas, and there's a lot of people who are like, what are you talking about? But,
well, you know what?
There's a lot of excitement there, and there's a lot of local candidates. I mean, we have put forth some of the most dynamic, most interesting, and some of the most talented group of candidates that I have ever seen, and we put them forth not only statewide, but in almost all of the districts across the state. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, your slate of 8 is an example. Fort Worth, Maloney Watson's an example. We've got 10 folks down in Houston that are doing a phenomenal things in the Court of Appeals. We've got 6 different congressional races going on in Houston, 3 of which have just been put on the red to blue list. So there's a lot of fabulous candidates out there. And if you haven't talked to Gina Ortiz-Jones out of San Antonio and West Texas, she's a force of nature. It's truly amazing.
She outraised Will Hurd by $1 million in the last quarter.
And she has an amazing resume.
Yeah.
Just an amazing.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. I was with her in Alpine last week, and the folks love her. Love her. She shared a little bit of time with me so that I could get some of the reflected love. I like that.
Yeah, you're running for Texas Supreme Court. It's boring.
You know, that's how I get my dollies, the reflected love.
Yep.
But it's love. I'll take it, right?
Yeah, Patti and I.
Yeah, absolutely.
Patti and I have both met you, and we'd agree. We endorse you in not for the race because we can't do that, but as a lovable guy.
Yeah, we're sending love out on the air.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Oh, thank you so much for that. That's awesome.
Yeah,
awesome.
And we need to take off. The hour is over. Did I push the right button, Josh? Okay, good. I'm just pushing buttons over here. Stephen Kirkland, running for Texas State Supreme Court. Good luck in your race.
Best of luck.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for your time today.
Sure.
Oh, you're welcome.
And for all of us here at Lambda Weekly, next week our guest is Kimberly.
Yes,
Kimberly Cantor from
Rainbow Roundup.
And we'll see you then.
This is William, hopefully your favorite videographer from Two Hats Publishing. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like it, please leave comments below, or like, follow, or subscribe to us and get notices of all our videos. We love it, even when you call.